He was the angriest man on television, and America couldn't get enough of it. A red-faced, vein-popping storm in uniform. Every episode he exploded, every insult perfectly timed, every outburst legendary. But behind the fire and fury of Sergeant Vince Carter was someone completely different. Frank Sutton wasn't just playing a character, he was hiding behind one. Long before the lights, the cameras, and the laughs, there was a war, a rejection, a battle for respect. And a man who never wanted to be famous, just taken seriously. The world saw a drill sergeant. They never saw the war hero, the Columbia graduate, the bookworm, the husband, the father, the man who yelled for a living but quietly carried everything that role never let him become. This is the real story of Frank Sutton. Frank Sutton wasn't just playing a military man, he had once desperately wanted to be one. As a teenager growing up in Clarksville, Tennessee, the rigid ideals of the United States Marine Corps fascinated him. The order, the duty, the symbolism. He idolized it. So when World War II erupted and enlistment lines stretched around the block, Sutton was among the first to raise his hand. But just days after stepping into the recruiting office, his dream was crushed. A routine color vision test, something most people wouldn't think twice about, disqualified him from joining the Marines. That small, technical failure, nothing he could control, cut him off from the one role he had wanted to earn in real life. It was more than disappointing. It was humiliating. It was personal. But Sutton wasn't built to accept rejection quietly. If the Marine Corps wouldn't have him, the Army would. And within months, he was no longer dreaming about war. He was living in it. Assigned to the Pacific Theater, Sutton quickly saw what combat actually looked like, what it smelled like, what it cost. He didn't serve behind a desk or entertain troops with scripts. He landed on beaches under enemy fire. He took part in 14 separate amphibious assault landings, a brutal, dangerous job that involved storming enemy-held islands under withering fire, often with little more than grit and luck to carry him through. This wasn't the Hollywood version of war. This was the kind where you didn't know if you'd live to see dinner. By the time the war ended, Sutton had been wounded, commended, and decorated. He returned home with a Bronze Star for bravery and a Purple Heart for injuries sustained in combat. He'd gone from a rejected recruit to a decorated veteran in just a few short years. And yet, when he later stepped in front of a camera to play a fictional Marine, none of that was mentioned. No director called attention to his medals. No talk show brought it up. The public only saw the caricature, the loudmouthed drill sergeant. Not the soldier who had once fought real battles while others played dress-up on sound stages. The contradiction was stark. The man who had risked his life for his country now found himself typecast as a man shouting about discipline in a comedy show. For Frank Sutton, the role of Sergeant Carter wasn't just a performance. It was a compromise, a strange collision between the uniform he had earned and the one he was pretending to wear. To the millions watching Gomer Pyle USMC, Frank Sutton was Sergeant Carter. His face twisted into rage, his jaw clenched in every scene. He looked like he'd snap if you sneezed wrong. But that explosive presence, the red-faced yelling, the high-strung authority, was a carefully honed illusion, a mask. And behind it, the real Frank Sutton lived in striking contrast. Off-screen, Sutton was soft-spoken, measured, even shy. Where Carter barked, Sutton paused. Where Carter marched, Sutton sat, with a book in his lap and no desire to entertain when the cameras weren't rolling. Cast and crew often remarked that Sutton would spend his breaks reading, not scripts but novels, Tolstoy, Chekhov, biographies of American presidents, even obscure philosophy texts. He wasn't doing it to impress anyone. He was doing it because that was who he was. The difference wasn't just personality, it was purpose. Sutton had no interest in being a celebrity. He didn't make red carpet appearances. He wasn't seen at LA parties or mingling with stars. He didn't chase interviews or care about magazine covers. The fame, while useful, was never the goal. Acting wasn't his way into the spotlight. It was his way of exploring truth. And it frustrated him when people couldn't tell the difference. He once told a colleague, only half joking, that the audience would be disappointed to know the real Frank Sutton wouldn't yell at a parking ticket, much less a grown man. The expectations placed on him by his performance became a kind of prison. Fans didn't just recognize him, they expected him to perform. In restaurants, on sidewalks, even in grocery stores, strangers would ask him to shout at them, like on TV. He would smile politely. But inside, the gap between who he was and who the world thought he was kept widening. Still, Sutton never lashed out publicly. He handled the misunderstanding the same way he handled everything, with quiet dignity. When a journalist once asked if playing Carter was cathartic, Sutton didn't gloat. He simply said, "I try to remember what it felt like to be scared and pretending I wasn't." That line, so simple, so heavy, revealed more than any interview ever could. Sergeant Carter's rage wasn't just for laughs. It came from a deeper place, a place Sutton rarely talked about. And maybe that's why the performance rang so true. Because it wasn't just an act. It was a man disguising his past in plain sight. At first glance, the chemistry between Gomer and Carter was lightning in a bottle. Jim Nabors' gentle, wide-eyed innocence made every line from Frank Sutton's red-faced drill sergeant land twice as hard and twice as funny. It was the perfect dynamic. Chaos and control, sweetness and steel. The audience couldn't get enough. Ratings soared. The show became a cultural fixture. But behind the slapstick and sitcom smiles, things weren't quite so simple. Jim Nabors was relaxed by nature. His demeanor on set mirrored his on-screen persona, calm, cheerful, and unhurried. He had a gift for lightness, even in high-pressure scenes. Sutton, on the other hand, was the opposite. He arrived early. He knew every line. He believed rehearsals were sacred and timing wasn't just important, it was everything. That difference in approach wasn't a problem at first. It was balance. But as the seasons wore on, what once made them a perfect match slowly started to drive them apart. Sutton's frustration rarely erupted into shouting, but everyone could feel it. His dissatisfaction came in glances, in tightened jaws, in the way he'd grip a script too tightly or pause a second too long before a scene. He was exacting, and when a take fell flat, especially due to improvisation or missed cues, it didn't sit well. He never embarrassed anyone. But his silence, his precision, became a kind of warning. People on set started to sense the tension, even if they couldn't always name it. Crew members later described rehearsals as careful, even tense. One recalled how Sutton once insisted on reshooting a scene, not because he flubbed a line, but because the energy felt off. For him, it wasn't just about getting laughs. It was about earning them. And when he felt others weren't matching that intensity, he took it personally. Over time, that personal commitment became a kind of isolation. He and Nabors began to drift, not from animosity, but from difference. By season 4, their conversations were brief, professional, and largely limited to the scenes they were in. No shouting matches, no dramatic fallouts, just a widening silence. Separate dressing rooms, different lunch tables, less eye contact between takes. And for Sutton, the silence said more than words ever could. The irony? None of it showed on screen. Frank Sutton never let personal tensions bleed into his performance. His character was still razor sharp, still as funny and fearsome as ever. The audience had no idea. That was part of his discipline. The same discipline forged on real battlefields now helped him survive a very different kind of war, one of identity, performance, and the growing weight of becoming someone he no longer recognized. But even the strongest performers have limits, and the cracks were starting to show. The end came quietly, but it hit Frank Sutton like a thunderclap. Jim Nabors had made up his mind. After 5 successful seasons, he was stepping away from Gomer Pyle, USMC, to pursue his music career and other projects. For Nabors, the decision marked a new beginning, a chance to evolve. For Sutton, it felt like the rug had been pulled from beneath a carefully built life. The show had become more than a job, it was structure, identity, momentum. While Nabors was preparing to leave Gomer behind, Sutton was still tethered to Carter. Deeply, reluctantly, entirely. When the news broke, Sutton didn't fight it. Not publicly. He smiled in interviews, thanked the fans, and congratulated Nabors on his next chapter. But behind the scenes, something fractured. People close to him recalled a quiet devastation, a sense that, without the show, something essential had been ripped away. Not just work, but the last connection to the role he had spent years mastering and the audience he never truly connected with as himself. There were talks of a spin-off. Executives floated the idea of Sergeant Carter leading a new series, something familiar, something loud. Sutton listened. He considered it. But in the end, he hesitated. He knew what it meant. Playing Carter once more meant doubling down on a version of himself the world wouldn't let go of. The sternness, the shouting, the tight uniform wrapped around a boxed-in man. It was a role he respected, but also one he feared becoming. Scripts started coming in, new shows, guest spots, commercials, but they all wanted the same man. The barking authoritarian, the blowhard, the drill sergeant under a different name. And slowly Sutton began to say no. Again and again. He declined parts that would have kept him visible but stuck. He once told a friend, "They don't want me. They want the noise." And so he stepped back. From television, from Hollywood, from everything that had made him famous. He wasn't disappearing. He was reclaiming something. Frank Sutton's post-television career wasn't flashy, but it was honest. He found his way back to the stage, the same place where he started before TV ever called. He acted in regional productions, traveled with theater companies, embraced smaller audiences, more complex characters. The roles were layered, the performances deep, the applause softer but more meaningful. And yet he was still haunted by the past. No matter where he went, people only saw Sergeant Carter. Grocery stores, gas stations, bookstores. Fans would yell, "Cool it, Carter," or ask him to scream like he did on TV. Kids would salute. Adults would quote lines. It never stopped. Sutton's son later said his father became more withdrawn during this time. Not bitter, not sad, just quiet. He poured his energy into theater and found some peace. But that peace was short-lived. In 1974, while performing in Love, a romantic stage comedy in Shreveport, Louisiana, Frank Sutton walked into his dressing room between shows. He never came out. A massive heart attack. He was just 50 years old. The news spread fast. America was shocked. How could the furious, strong-willed, fire-breathing Sergeant Carter just vanish? But those closest to him weren't surprised by the silence that followed, because Frank Sutton had lived his life that way. No scandals, no headlines, just work. Quiet, committed, relentless work. He died doing what he loved on a stage in front of real people, giving everything to the role, away from the noise, away from the myth. His funeral was small, private, no cameras, no red carpet tributes, just a man remembered by those who truly knew him. For decades, Sutton's legacy remained frozen in time. A face on TV, a voice in reruns, a character people loved but never really understood. That changed in 2023. A forgotten audio interview, long buried in a university archive, was digitized and released. Recorded just a few years before his death, Sutton finally spoke, honestly. When asked if he missed Gomer Pyle, Sutton paused. Then he said, "I miss working. I miss doing something that people care about. But the show? No, it boxed me in. You know how some people get typecast? I became the type." There was no resentment, just clarity. He continued, "Jim was good at what he did. But we were never close. We worked different, thought different. I respected him, but it was never easy." And then came the line that hit hardest. "I was yelling half the time because I was frustrated. Not at him, at the job, at how small it made everything feel." For a man America saw as larger than life, it turns out he felt anything but. In 2024, more tributes emerged. Fellow cast member Ronnie Shell admitted Sutton struggled quietly behind the scenes. Even Jim Nabors, before his own death, said Sutton didn't love fame. He loved the work. And that's how many fans now see him. Not just a character actor, but a war hero, a Columbia graduate, a theater performer, a father, a husband, a man who yelled on TV but lived in almost total silence. And that silence, it's finally being understood. Frank Sutton didn't chase attention, he chased excellence. He didn't want to be famous, he wanted to be great, and maybe he was, not for the reasons people thought, but for the reasons he never bragged about. So next time you see Sergeant Carter storming across a screen, listen closely. Behind the bark is a man who carried more than lines. He carried pain, dignity, discipline, and truth. And now at last, that truth is finally being heard. If Frank Sutton's story gave you a new perspective, hit that like button. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did you grow up watching Gomer Pyle? What do you remember about him? And make sure to subscribe for more stories that go deeper than the spotlight. Because the loudest voices are often hiding the quietest truths.